536 AD, or in the year that the sky went dark. And what else happened because of that? Weather patterns were severely affected by the blocked sunlight, leading to summer snowfall in China and the lowest temperature levels in more than 2,300 years. This is by AccuWeather Mike Puello. You wake up to a dark, dreary, gloom-feeling Monday type of morning for the 547th consecutive day. Just 18 months prior, you were a hard-working farmer gearing up for another beautiful, bountiful crop season, but then the skies went dark, and it was chaos. From early 536 to 537, they stayed dark across much of Eastern, that's AD, across much of Eastern Europe and throughout Asia. Spring turned into summer, and fall gave way to winter without a day of sunshine. Like a blackout curtain over the sun, millions of people across the world's most populated countries squinted through dim conditions, breathing in chokingly thick air and losing nearly every crop they were relying on to harvest. This is not the plot of a dystopian TV drama or a fantastical docu-fiction production. This was a harsh reality for the millions of people that lived through that literally dark time, or as some historians have declared, the worst ever to be alive, the worst year to be alive, the darkest year ahead of the darkest decade. For the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear, nor such as it is accustomed to shed, was the grim account Procopius, a prominent scholar who became a principal Byzantine historian of the 6th century, gave in History of the Wars. And from the time when this thing happened, men were free neither from war, nor pestilence, nor any other thing leading to death. Some 1,500 years later, Harvard University medieval historian Michael McCormick has reached a similar grim conclusion about not just 536 AD, but the dreadful decade that followed that terrible year. For people living across Europe in 536 AD, it was the beginning, he said, of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the worst year. As McCormick told AccuWeather, it was all set off by rapid, drastic climate change. In the spring of 536 AD, a volcanic eruption triggered the late Little Ice Age, Lalia for short, McCormick told AccuWeather. And this is an article from, this is a recent article from April 19th, 2022. Okay, just about 10 days ago. Now, the ramifications on top of ensuing eruptions in 540 and 547 AD were devastating. So there were additional eruptions right after that. Aerosols for the big volcanic eruptions blocked solar radiation, dropping the solar heating of the Earth's surface, he told AccuWeather in an email, adding that climate analysis from Cambridge University in the UK, done on tree rings, show the average summer temperature dropped between 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2.5 degrees Celsius across Eurasia. It's up to 2.7 degrees Celsius and 2.7 degrees and 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit cooler due to the heavy smog left behind after the eruption. The skies remained dim for up to 18 months. You can imagine there was no photosynthesis. Now, multiplying historical witnesses recount, triggering a dark year of turmoil that earned 536 AD its dubious destruction and the distinction. Weather patterns were severely affected by the blocked sunlight, leading to summer snowfall in China and the lowest temperature levels in more than 2,300 years, according to recorded historical accounts and climate reconstruction analysis. In the Middle East, China, and Europe, a dense fog was an inescapable daily nightmare, while widespread agricultural challenges in Ireland resulted in a failure of bread from the year 536 to 539 AD, according to the Gaelic Irish Annals. Much of the scientists' understanding of the impacts of the Iceland volcano were found during the historic ice core project a partnership between the University of Maine and Harvard University that McCormick co-led along with Professor Paul Majewski of the Climate Change Institute. Using ice core samples from Iceland, the team mapped out the archaeological timeline to pinpoint when and where the initial volcanic eruption must have occurred in Iceland. So this was an Iceland eruption, and it caused East Europe and Asia and all the way to China climatic destruction. Its impacts were widespread and deadly. Ancient witnesses report that the sun stopped shining brightly for 14 to 18 months, McCormick said. The result was several years of failed harvest, famines causing migrations and turbulence across Eurasia. The outbreak of the original bubonic plague. While the 6th century outbreak of the bubonic plague may be less remembered than the 14th century reoccurrence of the disease, which came to be known as the Black Death, the 6th century pandemic was still responsible for destroying at least 1/3 of the Eastern Roman Empire population, leading, of course, to its collapse. Dubbed the Justinian Pandemic, or the Plague of Justinian. Justinian is the emperor of Constantinople, today Istanbul. He was the emperor who built the Church of Holy Wisdom, Hagia Sophia, in Istanbul. Now, dubbed the Justinian Pandemic, or Plague of Justinian, the disease spread throughout the Roman Egypt before infecting the rest of the world over an ensuing 200 years. McCormick said ancient DNA has shown the disease causing pathogen to be Yersinia pestis, bubonic plague, a disease of rats and other rodents that spilled over into human populations. In the wake of the climate-altering volcanic eruptions and darkened year of 536 AD, McCormick said the situation was fatally ripe for the plague to wreak havoc, although he said there was yet to be a precise relation establishment between the abrupt onset of Lalia and the Justinian pandemic. McCormick said that it seems likely that, for instance, the food shortages caused by the sudden cooling in many parts of Eurasia weakened the populations and made them more susceptible to the pathogen. So, of course, there was malnutrition. And, of course, from the malnutrition, their health was deteriorating. They couldn't fight off the virus. So the famines almost certainly led to the mass migrations of people as well. He said, likely carrying the disease with them to other areas. Compared to the modern day hardships, the differences are shocking. He said, you have to take the period as a whole, adding that 536 AD was just the beginning of a very tough time. The plague pandemic on top of the abrupt cooling must have been very difficult. And he continued pointing out that 1.8% case fatality ratio compared to 40 to 60% mortality for untreated bubonic plague. So just how massive those volcanic eruptions have been. Multiple history-altering eruptions captured in ice. Majewski, a glaciologist from University of Maine, also heavily involved in historical ice core project, said that his team was able to analyze 2,000 years worth of historic natural disasters taken from 72-meter drilling in Iceland that presented the researchers with historical timeline of the elements. The ice sample from spring 536 AD, graduate student Laura Hartman and volcanologist Andrei Kurbatov found microscopic particles of volcanic glass, which closely matched glass particles previously found in lakes around Europe and ice core samples taken from Greenland. And they conclude that the perfectly disastrous mix of winds and weather in 536 AD must have guided the plume across Europe and into Asia, casting a chilly pall as the volcanic fog rolled through. Other researchers also believe that Icelandic 536 AD eruption emitted thick ash that spread across the northern hemisphere, pumping large quantities of sulfate into the atmosphere. And on top of that eruption, other studies conclude recently having suggested that there could have been more than one volcano responsible for the time period's tragedies. The other notable blast, researchers say, is believed to have been one of the strongest eruptions in the last 10,000 years, likely and only comparable to the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora. Tambora erupted. The eruption also led to the similarly bleak year. As much of 1816 was also shrouded in darkness, leading to unprecedented low temperatures and hundreds of thousands of deaths. And seasons failed crops, time period known as the year without a summer. In the United States, snow fell in June in New York and Maine, while heavy frosts of ice storms occurred as late as July in the region. So the 6th century, another altering volcanic eruption about 5,000 miles away from Iceland, Central America, with a volcanic blast more than 100 times stronger than the 1980 Mount St. Helens. The dust veil, using dating techniques, the stable carbon isotope records, they presented a model to depict just how brutal life was for people alive at that time. The dust veil reduced normal levels of solar radiation, ruining years of crop harvest and contributing to remarkably simultaneous outbreaks of famine, leaving humans with long-term lack of vitamin D, which diminished health and quality of life in those years of darkness. McCormick said, that is more natural climate records than Lalia reconstruction are better understood. The Arabian Peninsula, for instance, might have become a little less dry, while the effect seems more dramatic and negative both north of the Mediterranean. Even if it may sound hard to believe, given the past 100 years of multiple wars and numerous devastating pandemics, McCormick told History.com that the horrifying period of history was not blown out of proportion by witness accounts. It actually did take place. It was chaotic. It was, he said, pretty drastic change. It happened overnight. The ancient witnesses really were onto something. They were not being hysterical or imagining the end of the world. It was just as they were describing. This is by Mark Puello AccuWeather, article of April 19th, 2022 on Bennett Reality. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.